Well, let's get started. Good evening and welcome everyone to the last in our three-part series on restoring Oregon's kelp forest. Tonight's webinar is titled Sea Otters and Kelp Forests, Restoring Oregon's Missing Link with Chanel Hason. My name is Kent Doty. I am the Coastal Conservation Coordinator for Seven Capes Bird Alliance. Oops. We are very appreciative of our partner organizations, the Elakha Alliance, the Oregon Kelp Alliance, Oregon Shores, and Friends of Otter Rock, who all helped promote this program. Keep up the amazing work that you are all doing to conserve Oregon's coast. Also want to give a shout out to Nissa Parker, Seven Capes' very own digital media coordinator, who helped put this program together tonight. This is a webinar format, so only the panelists are visible and the audience is muted for the courtesy of the speaker. Following introductions, our speaker will talk for about an hour, and then we'll have plenty of time for a question and answer session. During the presentation, you can put your questions, type them into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's program will finish up about 7:30, and just to let everybody know, the program is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. So a little bit about who we are. Seven Capes Bird Alliance, formerly the Audubon Society of Lincoln City, has been serving Tillamook and Lincoln counties since 2006. Our core programs are education, community science, and conservation action. We provide monthly birding outings for all ages and knowledge levels. Our conservation focus areas include rocky habitats, forest practices, marine reserves, water quality, and threats to birds and wildlife, all viewed through the lens of climate change. Check us out at sevencapes.org. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the owners of our land that we live on. Before the period of white settlement, the land and waters we now occupy on the Oregon coast were home to the Tillamook and Alsea people. It's right and just to recognize these sovereign nations and to remember the dispossession they were forced to endure. Despite these losses, Tillamook and Alsea people continue to thrive and act collectively as part of the existing confederations. As we engage with the wildlife and the environment that surrounds us today, we pledge to learn from these nations within the confederated tribes of the Siletz and our neighbors, the confederated tribes of the Grand Ronde. We look forward to collaborating on our common goals. Now, to the good part, to introduce tonight's speaker. I think we're all in for a special treat. Our speaker, Chanel Hason, brings science to life with energy and heart. Chanel is a marine biologist, environmental educator, and passionate ocean advocate, serving as the Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Elakha Alliance. She's got a background that includes working with sea otters at Monterey Bay Aquarium and conducting marine research on the Great Barrier Reef, and educating communities about the wonders of the natural world. At Elakha, she leads public engagement efforts to support restoration of sea otters to the Oregon coast, reviving an essential keystone species to help restore balance to our nearshore environment. Whether she's giving a pub talk, running a fundraiser, or tabling at community events, Chanel loves inspiring people to fall in love with sea otters and kelp forests that they call home. So welcome to the magic of Chanel.
Wow, what an introduction. Can't thank you very much. All right, let me share my screen. Oh, get this. Okay, does everything look good on your end? Yes, hopefully. Okay,
It looks good.
perfect. All right, let's get going. Well, greetings, everyone. Thanks for tuning in on this webinar here, June 3rd. My name is Chanel Hason. I'm the Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Elakha Alliance, and today we'll be chatting about sea otters, kelp forests, and bringing them back to the Oregon coast. So a little bit background on myself is always fun. If you never met me before, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and why I really love what I'm doing. So I fell in love with the ocean when I was 5 and went to SeaWorld with my mom, pictured there, and really wanted to be a marine biologist and train marine mammals and all that fun things when people, I think my age mostly, all wanted to be marine biologists. And so I continued that dream and went to school at California State University, Monterey Bay, and studied marine and coastal ecology and was able to study abroad for a year in Australia doing research on the Great Barrier Reef. I realized scientific writing wasn't really my thing, but I graduated, got totally random odd jobs in LA. I was the director of operations for the California Philharmonic Orchestra for one, and that was random because I'm not musically talented, so that was pretty entertaining for me. And then several years later, I was in the top 25 out of 500,000 applicants to be a wildlife caretaker in South Australia. So, this whole international campaign. I love working with animals, so I thought this would be a really fun experience. I didn't make it to the top 3, but instead I got asked to apply to be Miss Scuba USA. Yes, there is a scuba diving beauty pageant. And so I represented the US in 2013 in Malaysia for 2 weeks. And for being the only rescue diver and marine biologist there, I won 3 titles. So I thought that was pretty amazing. And after that, I moved to Puerto Rico and was an eco tour guide naturalist for Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ambassadors of the Environment program. So I got to take the top 1% of the top 1% of the world kayaking and snorkeling and forest hikes and realized my real passion lies in educating people about the environment, the ocean, and our planet. And so that's when I moved to Portland 10 years ago this year and received my master's in education in leadership for sustainability education at Portland State. And I started working for the Elakha Alliance about 5 years ago too. And it literally is my dream job. I get paid to talk to people about sea otters and kelp forests and things I've loved my entire life. I have a stuffed sea otter in my closet that I had when I was a kid, so everything is a little full circle. So great to meet all of you, and hopefully if you see me in the wild here in Oregon, you can come say hello. So we are now going to focus on the juicy part of the talk, and that is sea otter biology, estuary and kelp forest ecology, and then a little bit about the history of sea otters in Oregon and hopefully the soon future. So I like to start off with a historical range of where sea otters used to live before the fur trade. So everything in yellow and red was the historic range of sea otters. So you can see it started all the way down in Baja, Mexico, up the western continental United States, across the Aleutian Islands of Alaska to Russia and Japan. And so now in the red is where sea otters are missing in that native range, and yellow is where there are sea otters currently. So sea otters themselves, they are part of the Mustelidae family, which includes wolverines, minks, badgers, and weasels. There are 3 subspecies, and there's only subspecies because they are geographically separated after the fur trade. So there's no genetic differences between these 3 subspecies. So we've got one, the northern sea otter, which are all in Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. Then we've got the southern sea otter that are all in California only. And then we've got the Asian or Russian sea otter, which are based in Japan and Russia. And so these are fully aquatic otter species, the only otter species that is fully aquatic. Every other otter species is semi-aquatic. So sea otters, they sleep, they eat, they groom themselves, they have their babies, everything basically floating on their backs in the ocean at all times. It's very rare that they come on shore or on a rock, but sometimes they do haul themselves out to groom or sunbathe. Um, or often if they're sick. And they live about 10 to 20 years. Usually females live a bit longer. Sea otter moms are some of the best single moms in the animal kingdom. They have to teach that pup how to groom itself, how to forage for food, how to swim, how to dive in about 6 months. And once that sea otter pup knows how to do all the sea otter things, it goes off and the mom usually gives birth to a new pup and repeats the process. They are usually in rafts by sex. So there's usually rafts of females and rafts of males. Males have a little bit more freedom to expand their range north and south from those rafts of females looking for new rafts of females, if you catch my drift. And so sea otters are one of the only marine mammals that lack what every other marine mammal has, and that is a thick layer of fat called blubber. So instead, they're equipped with the densest fur of any animal on the whole entire planet. So if you do the OK symbol, that circle there that your fingers make is about 1 square inch. So inside that 1 square inch, there is up to 600,000 and 650,000 to 1 million hairs. And that one little square inch, which is a lot when you're considering how many hairs on the human head, we have about 100,000 if we're lucky. So these sea otters have this really thick, warm pelt. And so they actually have two layers of fur. They have an underlayer and a guard layer. And so they're constantly grooming themselves because they're trapping a pocket of air between those two layers of fur, and that's keeping them really insulated. So their bottom layer of fur never actually gets wet. So next time you're at a zoo or aquarium and you see the sea otters diving underwater, you'll see all these tiny bubbles leaving their fur, and think of that as kind of like their warmth blanket is escaping. So every time they resurface, they're going to be constantly grooming and putting that air back in between those two layers of fur. So they are eating machines. Sea otters have to eat about a quarter of their body weight every single day. So for about a 70-pound sea otter, that's about 20 pounds of food every day. So you can imagine that these are one of the most expensive animals to feed at any zoo or aquarium because they are eating so many pounds of fresh, high quality seafood every single day. In the wild, they're eating over 100 different species, so that ranges from clams, crabs, mussels, urchins, sometimes marine worms, snails, even octopus. And they're highly intelligent and often use tools like rocks to crack open those hard-shelled, yummy items they like to eat. So they have these short, blunt skulls, and they actually have pretty fracture-resistant teeth. So their enamel is 2 times stronger than ours, which kind of makes sense, right? If they're eating all these hard-shelled invertebrates all the time, they have to have some strong teeth. And sea otters are the epitome of you are what you eat. So they eat so many purple sea urchins that it actually turns their bones, it turns their teeth, it turns their vertebrae purple. And this phenomenon is called echinochrome staining. So they ingest that when they are eating those purple urchins, and then it becomes, and then that's what makes their bones turn a purple color. It's kind of like when humans eat too many carrots and sometimes our skin turn orange. It's very similar to that. But I actually have a skull of a sea otter that washed up in Newport about a year ago, and he actually has several purple teeth. So next time I'm tabling somewhere, which will be on World Oceans Day, this upcoming Sunday at the Oregon Coast Aquarium, come check out my skull. Okay, so unfortunately, there are several threats to sea otters. So we have predation. So white sharks, when they're transitioning from juveniles to adults, from eating fish to marine mammals, they often mistake sea otters for a seal or a sea lion that has that big layer of fat. That's what they're looking for. Instead, they get a mouthful of hair with a sea otter and immediately just let go. So they don't actually ingest the sea otter, but usually those bites are pretty fatal for those otters. Then we've got a group of orcas in Alaska that are known to hunt sea otters. So there was one of these orcas, a female that washed ashore. She had 6 sea otters in her stomach already, and then there was one that was stuck in her throat, and that's what made her die. And then there's some human-caused disturbances like oil spills, probably one of the worst things for sea otters on the planet because think of that really important fur coat that they're wearing, their pelt. If they get anything on that pelt that interacts with the oils on their fur or disrupts any of that, then that is fatal to their success in the wild. And also, if they are grooming themselves, they're ingesting that oil, and obviously that's super harmful. So that's one of the biggest threats to sea otters. And then we've got plastic pollution and ocean acidification. And also, disease is another significant threat. And so one of the most well-known ones with that cat hanging on there is because feral cats are carriers to Toxoplasmosis gondii, which is a parasite. And so when cats release themselves outside and then it rains, their feces gets into the storm. Um, storm, yes. Sorry, my brain. This is my third presentation in like 24 hours, so my brain's all over the place today. Storm drains, there we go, into the ocean. And then that gets into the aquatic environment, and sea otters get affected, and it causes a lot of neurological damage. And so this often happens off of the California coastline. So I get emails all the time of people saying, Chanel, I just saw a sea otter running on the pier in Depot Bay. I just saw a sea otter running on the rocks in Florence. Um, and so if you think you see a sea otter, definitely take a photo or video and send it to me because 99.9% of the time it's a river otter. We have North American river otters here in Oregon. We don't have sea otters, but sometimes we have maybe 1 to 5 sightings of sea otters on the Oregon coast. So I'm not saying ruling that totally out, but let's go over the differences between the two species. So, North American river otters, we have a lot of those here. They're the only otter species in the world out of 14 that are not listed as threatened or endangered. So their populations are doing just fine. One of the biggest determinations between these two otters are the tails. So if you look at the tails of North American river otters, they are almost half of the size of their whole body length. So they've got these really long, round tails. And they den on land. So they have webbed feet, but they're super agile. So they can run really easily. They can climb over rocks. Sea otters in the next slide that you'll see have these big back flippers. So they look very uncomfortable running or walking on land. River otters are usually in groups of 3 to 4 little family units, and they swim on their stomachs. And they do, though, swim in the ocean and forage in the intertidal zone sometimes, usually close to wherever river mouths are. So it's not uncommon to see them in the ocean. Sea otters, if you can look at the photo of the sea otter that's standing up, you can see their tail is pretty short. It's about the same length as their back flippers. So if you think you see a sea otter on the Oregon coast, look at the tail. And also if it's floating on its back, then that is a sea otter. So as I mentioned before, sea otters live their entirety of their lives in the ocean, so they're often floating on their backs. They're about 50 to 100 pounds, so they're quite large compared to river otters, which are about 15 to 30 pounds. They only have one pup a year, and as I mentioned, they rarely come onto land. So hopefully now you are experts, and whenever you email me, you'll know the difference between river otters and sea otters. Now I'm going to test your skills. I don't know if you can chat with me. If not, I usually have audience participation shouted out. But if you can guess, which otters are these? Did I hear you say sea otters? That's correct. Yes. And then now we are over at the river otters. Look at those really long tails. They love to eat eggs. Thankfully, the cost of eggs has gone down now, so the Oregon Zoo is very happy about that. And we are back to the sea otters. Here they're going to show you their nice canines. and also how they use their enclosure to help crack open those oyster shells. And so now you know the differences, and you can go visit them at the Oregon Zoo and see the two of them. All right, switching gears a little bit, let's talk about sea otters and their role in healthy estuaries. And we've got about 22 major estuaries here in Oregon, and an estuary is where freshwater meets saltwater, so where river mouths enter the ocean. And since we don't have an estuary that currently has sea otters, let's go to one of the most famous ones, and that is in the Elkhorn Slough in California, just north of Monterey Bay. It's a beautiful ecosystem. It's a perfect place for harbor seals to have their pups. Same thing for sea otters, to hang out and have a little safe environment from sharks from entering in there. And then it's got over 340 bird species. It's one of the best places for ecotourism I think there is that I've been to. So sorry, I'm gonna drink some water. Okay, so Dr. Brent Hughes out of Sonoma State University helped really uncover the interconnectedness of sea otters and the Elkhorn Slough. And so he did this when he noticed that the water quality started to really improve in the slough. And if you know the Elkhorn Slough, the river that it comes from is really heavily agricultural land runoff. So usually not the best things entering the waterway. So he's like, what is going on here that's helping this water quality? So he realized that, so let's work backwards. So eelgrass is predominantly in these Elkhorn sloughs and sloughs. And so there's algae that grows on the blades of the eelgrass, but thankfully we have sea slugs. And sea slugs eat the algae that grows on those blades, so that allows the eelgrass to photosynthesize and thrive. But if there's too many crabs in the ecosystem eating those sea slugs, then there's not enough sea slugs to eat that algae. And that eelgrass is kind of suffocating. But thanks to sea otters entering the slough in about 1984 and populating that slough, they're eating a lot of those crabs, which allows the sea slugs to do their job and eat that algae on the eelgrass blade. And so, thankfully, because of that, this allows the eelgrass to be healthy and photosynthesize and thrive, which improves water quality. And also, Dr. Brent Hughes and his team helped discover some new information about sea otters and their crab eating ability. And so in 2024, sea otters made their debut on the cover of Nature magazine because he realized that sea otters eat so many marsh crabs, and these crabs burrow down and dislodge the roots of the eelgrass. So think if so many crabs are doing that, that's killing all of the eelgrass and not allowing that eelgrass to reproduce. And so with the crabs, with the sea otters having a healthy appetite for these marsh crabs, it's allowing those roots to stay in the marsh banks and decreases erosion by up to 90% by having sea otters present. So that is huge, especially when we have large storm surges and things. We want there to be less erosion on our coastline. And then the latest study that Dr. Brent Hughes came out with is that sea otters in the slough also have a very healthy appetite for invasive European green crabs. And guess which state also has these invasive crab species? Oregon. So he realized that one southern sea otter can eat up to 50,000 to 120,000 of these European green crabs annually. So this is a huge plus. If we were to reintroduce sea otters in one of the estuaries in Oregon that has this invasive European green crab, that hopefully they would do the same, because these European green crabs are eating juvenile Dungeness crabs in Oregon, and that is horrible for all the reasons you can think of. So overall, when you have sea otters and estuaries, the whole ecosystem is winning. You have great habitat for salmon and juvenile crab and fish. It helps stores carbon as a huge carbon sink. It improves water quality, is a safe haven for migratory birds, decreases erosion, and increases biodiversity. Now let's dive into another ecosystem. We've got the Monterey Bay giant kelp forest here by my friend Patrick Webster filmed this. And I just like to showcase what this ecosystem looks like. If you've never been swimming or snorkeling or diving in a kelp forest, it's the premise of this whole webinar series. Kelp forests are amazing ecosystems. They comprise nearly 25% of our world's coastline, stretching from California to Australia, South Africa, and Central America. And they do best in cold, nutrient-rich waters, which if you ever dipped your toe in the Oregon coast, you know we've got very cold water here. So we have quite a few kelp forests off our coastline, which we're very lucky to have. So let's talk about the structure of kelp. So although it looks sort of like a plant, it's actually a large brown macroalgae. And so instead of having root systems like plants do that suck up nutrients, instead they have something called a holdfast. So think of it as like a sticky spaghetti that's looking for a rock, some rocky hard substrate to settle upon. And so once it does, then it really wants to get to the top of the surface where the sun is. Sorry, let me get a glass of water real fast. Okay, sorry about that. I would rather prevent a coughing fit than have one in the middle of a presentation, which has happened. Okay, so it's got that hold fast, then it grows this really long stipe, and it floats to the surface because it has a gas-filled bulb called a pneumaticist, and then it's got 50 to 100 blades on the top, getting to the surface of the sun to photosynthesize. And so that is the bull kelp, the one on the left there, which is our predominant species here in Oregon. And on the right is an example of a giant kelp. And instead of having one bulb and multiple blades on that, they have individual bulbs coming off of the stipe with one blade on each. And giant kelp is the fastest growing algae on the planet. It can grow about 2 feet per day, whereas the bull kelp can grow about 10 inches per day. So, why should you care about underwater forests? I think they're the best. So they're biodiversity hotspots. They provide shelter, food for a wide range of marine species, from tiny invertebrates to large predators like seals and sea lions. It sequesters carbon. It does coastal protection too, so it acts as natural barriers, reducing wave energy and preventing shoreline erosion. Through photosynthesis, they produce oxygen, so we get a lot of oxygen on our planet, almost over 50% from our oceans through algae. And they support fisheries for being safe havens for a lot of the commercial fish that Oregonians and beyond like to consume. And they help maintain a healthy marine environment by regulating species populations and nutrient cycles. And so kelp also helps fight climate change, and that is through sequestering carbon. And so they're also a great place to whale watch too. So unfortunately, it hasn't been the best year for our gray whales, our migratory gray whales along the Oregon coast. There have been, I think, about 21 or so that have already washed ashore deceased in this year alone. And so this also happened in 2019, the same kind of phenomenon. And so there could be a lot of environmental factors at play here, but Dr. Lee Torres did a research study not too long ago and discovered that the Pacific Coast Feeding Group have decreased in size by over 13% in the past 2 decades. So these whales are just naturally getting smaller and smaller. And that could be because their food source is diminishing due to environmental changes. So let's talk about kelp and the carbon cycle. So how does kelp sequester carbon? Here, I'm a very visual person, so I really like this kind of visual here. So kelp uses sunlight and carbon dioxide from the water during photosynthesis to grow, and that process removes CO2 from the atmosphere. Then as kelp grows, it stores carbon in its blades and stipes and holdfasts. Then when other animals eat the kelp, the carbon stored in it moves up the food chain. And then when kelp dies, hopefully it floats out and sinks to the bottom of the sea and gets trapped in that sediment for thousands and thousands of years. And then the process repeats. So sea otters, we know, are a keystone species within these marine ecosystems, thanks to Dr. Jim Estes, who was a groundbreaking researcher and marine biologist, and he discovered this in Alaska during his research. And personally, I just really like to show these photos because one, it's really hard to capture sea otters underwater because there's darn fast little guys. And two, it's also very illegal to be this close to sea otters. But Ralph Pace is a wonderful underwater photographer and had a permit through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to capture these images. So what is a keystone species? So it's one that has an effect on its environment disproportionate to its abundance. Basically, a small number of sea otters has a really huge impact on the overall health and diversity of that ecosystem. So this is what happens with sea otters and kelp forests. They consume purple urchins, and purple urchins consume kelp. So when you have sea otters in the ecosystem, they're eating those urchins, kelp can grow and flourish. When you remove sea otters from that ecosystem, there's an imbalance. So the urchins overpopulate, they eat too much kelp, and that's destroying entire ecosystems. So now let's focus specifically here in Oregon. So here we've got two species of urchins. We have purple, which are about the size of your fist. And then you open your hand up. Red are about the size of your hand fully open. They like to eat kelp, algae, decomposing critters. Scientists, one really cool thing is that scientists found a red urchin that was 200 years old, which is just the oldest one that we found. So that might mean they may live longer than that. And that's probably because sea urchins never stop growing. They just grow very, very slowly, about 1/100th of an inch per year after they reach adulthood. And sea urchins are really sensitive beings. And when I say that, I mean they're sensitive to pollution. So they're really good water quality indicators. So if there's pollution in the water in their environment, then the sea urchins won't be doing well. And so that's something scientists can look out for. So while sea otters have been absent here in Oregon for almost over 100 years, we've had another key predator in the kelp forest, and that was the sunflower sea star. Until about 2013, 2015, we had a huge marine heat wave called the blob. And so this rose ocean temperatures about 3 degrees Celsius above normal, which for us, that doesn't sound like very much, right? But for small invertebrates and animals in the ocean, that's a huge difference. And so this kicked off something called sea star wasting disease. And so this affected every sea star. And basically, they would just kind of turn to mush. Their arms would break off from their body and walk away from themselves, kind of like that photograph there. And so it took about 10 years for scientists to discover what that actually was. And they found out last year that it was called Vibrio pectinacida. And so now that we know what it's called, hopefully there are researchers and scientists growing these sunflower sea stars in labs right now and releasing them into the wild as another predator for the urchins to combat that issue. So now that we have figured out that strain of bacterium, perhaps we can make them immune to it once we release them back into the wild. And so the Oregon Kelp Alliance released the Oregon Kelp Forest status report not too long ago, and they stated that we've lost about 2/3 of our kelp forest cover on the Oregon coast. Although there are some places that are gaining kelp forest cover, a lot of it has been lost. So we've lost historically a lot of our kelp forest cover. So this is really tragic and also really alarming that we should all know about this issue and want to do something about it. So we went from a current reality of a pretty healthy kelp forest with predators in the ecosystem that are eating those urchins to what we now call an urchin barren, where these urchins come out of their normal hiding places in nooks and crevices of the reef because they have nothing to be scared of. Nothing's eating them. And then they just devour kelp forests like lawnmowers at an alarming rate and just leave behind this purple carpet of spiny sea urchins on the seafloor. And so, what's also really horrible is that they just don't die. Even if there's no food around them for a whole year, they turn into this zombie urchin state. So, once they basically destroy a kelp forest, they don't have anything else to eat. They turn on a starvation mode. So, they stop reproducing, they slow down their metabolism. And if anything falls to the ocean floor, then they're all over it and continue grazing on that. And so the pictures on the left are an example of a zombie urchin. So their gonads, that bright yellow stuff on the right, is pretty degraded. So they're basically starving themselves and they're not reproducing. And so the ones on the right with all that yellow stuff in there, that's uni. If you eat sushi, you're eating the gonads of sea urchins. So that's a very healthy, happy urchin on the right. So now let's switch gears a bit and talk about the past, present, and future of sea otters here on the Oregon coast. So a really condensed timeline. About 2 million years ago, sea otters evolved somewhere near modern day Russia. And then about 10,000 years ago, they arrived in the Pacific or indigenous people came to the Pacific Northwest and coexisted with sea otters here on the Oregon coast. And then about 115 years ago, we had the maritime fur trade, which decimated almost the entirety of sea otters on the entire planet. And then 55 years ago, a little more than that now, we did have a translocation attempt in Oregon, which I'll dive into soon. So I really want to touch upon the indigenous importance of sea otters here in Oregon. If you look at the first Chinook word for sea otter, Elakha, is where we have our name from the Elakha Alliance. So it's a Chinook trade jargon word for sea otter. And then there's a total of 6 different words for sea otter in 8 different indigenous languages on our coast alone. And we know that both northern and southern subspecies of sea otters intermingled here on the Oregon coast based on bones found in shell middens, which were basically like discard piles for indigenous people. So that's really important because right now those 2 subspecies have been separated for over a century, and having that genetic diversity between those 2 subspecies again would be super great for the health of the species overall. And so the maritime fur trade was pretty much the demise of sea otters between in just a couple hundred years from the late 1700s to the early 1900s. Spanish, Russian, British, American mariners came to the Pacific Northwest to hunt sea otters because the Chinese really valued the pelts. And so sea otter fur was known as soft gold because it was so highly valued. So that's why in just a couple hundred years, they decimated 99% of the global population of sea otters on the planet. And the last known sea otter pelt traded here in Oregon was in 1910, found in the Coos Bay Times in a little excerpt. So thankfully, they didn't kill every single sea otter because we still have them on our planet today. So there is about 11 remnant populations that were found that survived the fur trade. We have that tiny pocket off of the California coastline. There was about 50 off of Big Sur. And then there were several remnant populations in the Aleutian Islands as well. And that black range, once again, is the historical range sea otters lived before. So where are sea otters today? We have about 3,000 in California, and those southern subspecies are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act because they have not expanded their genetic diversity. So all those 3,000 stem from the surviving 50 of the fur trade. And then next up, we have Washington, and there's about 3,000 there as well. And they were reintroduced there in the 1970s, so that's why they have a population now. British Columbia has about 8,000 sea otters. Alaska is home to 90,000 or 90% of all sea otters on the planet. And that's because that's the literal heaven for sea otter in terms of ecosystems. It's the long linear coastline of the perfect inlets for them to be thriving and happy. Japan only has about 50, and those are located off of the coast of Hokkaido. And Russia has about 18,000. And so we did have a sea otter reintroduction attempt in 1969 through 1972. And they did this because sea otters from Amchitka Island, unknowingly, the US government was going to do nuclear bomb testing there. And so researchers were like, hey, what about this population of sea otters? And they're like, figure it out. So thankfully, they got federal funding to capture as many of these sea otters as possible and translocate them to Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and Southeast Alaska. So nearly 100 animals were released at Cape Arago and Port Orford. None of these sea otters were tagged, so we don't know if some of them swam north and joined the Washington population or south. And so they did manage to reproduce and have pups, but after about a decade, they all disappeared. And so researchers think they just didn't release enough animals initially to withstand natural immigration and mortality rates that happen in a translocation attempt. Um, and also, it wasn't the most well-planned translocation because they had to act really quickly to save this population of sea otters. So 50 years, into the future where we are now, we have a lot better understanding of translocation methods, a lot better understanding of sea otter biology, and we also have a lot of great research and data to find places that might be better suited locations to release these sea otters and also have a very well thought out plan, which is why we're hopeful in maybe 5 to 7 years we can do another sea otter translocation attempt. So let's chat about the Elakha Alliance and who we are. So we were founded by the late David Hatch, who's photographed there on the left. He was a Siletz tribal member, and he was building a boat with his son Peter in 1999 and came across the word Elakha in a Chinook trade jargon dictionary looking for a name for his boat. And he's like, why don't we have sea otters here on the Oregon coast? And so then that led to several decades of him reaching out to scientists, researchers, other tribal members to figure out why and how he could bring sea otters back to the Oregon coast to help our marine ecosystems, to help with the cultural significance, and help boost our local coastal economies. And unfortunately, David passed away very unexpectedly in 2016, but his passion and drive to bring sea otters back to the Oregon coast lived on through Bob Bailey, who is our board president. He gathered a group of amazing humans to become a board of directors for the Elakha Alliance in 2018. And then we became an official nonprofit 501c3 in 2020. I got hired in 2021, and I'm the first ever employee. And now we have 5 full-time employees for the Elakha Alliance. Jane Beccari is our executive director. Her and I are based in Portland. Kyle Motley is our coastal community coordinator. He's down in Coos Bay and does a lot of one-on-one work with the fishing community. Katie Russell is our development and operations coordinator. She was previously on our board of directors and is amazing, knows this organization front and back. And Lucila Gambino is our brand new reintroduction planning manager for a really wonderful grant that I'll talk about in a couple minutes. So our mission, if you haven't figured it out already, is to make Oregon's marine and coastal ecosystems and communities more robust and resilient by restoring a healthy population of sea otters back here on the Oregon coast. And we just updated our mission not too long ago to really put forth that the main goal of this is to help revitalize our marine ecosystems and reinstill that cultural significance to our local communities. And that is by bringing sea otters back. So it's more than just bringing about this cute little furry face. There's a lot more to it than just that. And so we're really founded on getting the science right and doing the work. So we hired the top 6 sea otter scientists in the world to figure out, is it even feasible to bring sea otters back to the Oregon coast? And so, yes, it is, thankfully. So our scientific feasibility study, if you are really into scientific writing and research, is all available on our website for free. You can view each chapter, and if you really want to buy the book as well, we have copies of that available on our website. But the 5 key takeaways are that reintroductions have been successful. About 30% of today's global number of otters are due to successful reintroduction attempts in Southeast Alaska, British Columbia, and Washington. Reintroducing them is likely to succeed. And obviously, there are some more research studies, socioeconomic and legal, that we are working to fill in those gaps right now. Estuaries may be a key place as well to do reintroduction, so we're looking at that. Dr. Tim Tinker, who was the lead on this feasibility study, in 2022 created the Oregon Sea Otter model. So it's a statistical model that you could go on yourself and pick a place on the Oregon coast and say, hypothetically, I want to put 50 female and 50 male sea otters off of Port Orford. And then you hit a button and it shows you the likelihood of success based on all the factors in that location. He just updated that model to include Northern California and updated data in Oregon. So I think that should be published pretty soon for people to review. So that is the best means for us to really understand where sea otters might be successful. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published their own feasibility assessment in 2022 as well. And so they did ultimately conclude that reintroducing sea otters to Oregon is ecologically feasible and could have significant benefits for marine ecosystem health. But U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has not taken a position at this point whether to move forward, and we probably won't hear from them in the next 4 years. So, what are our next steps? So obviously, me getting out here talking to all of you today is part of our outreach and public engagement. So just educating the public about why they should know sea otters are missing, why they should care, and why they should want to bring them back for our marine ecosystems. And we do this across the whole state of Oregon and also internationally as well. And we are ramping up our political advocacy. So we worked with a lot of really great organizations to help pass House Bill 4134 recently, which is amazing. So that is helping fund wildlife and habitat restoration work through ODFW. So that is really great. About $35 million a year is the estimated revenue to help with that. And we have a couple advocacy links on our website that you can quickly fill out, and it'll send to our governor saying that, hey, I really like sea otters and you should too. So that's up there if you feel like you want to do that today. And then we're also increasing our tribal engagement. Peter is the son of David Hatch, our founder, and he is our secretary on our board of directors. And him and I always go out every summer to the OSU Tribal Youth Camp for high schoolers and interact with them and educate them in Newport. And then we're also filling in information and research gaps that were outlined in our feasibility study. We're doing a shell fisheries impact report. We hired the Big Fish Lab out of OSU to figure out where white sharks hang out on the Oregon coast so we don't release sea otters into a secret white shark hangout. And then we were working really closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service until this new administration. And so now we have shifted gears a bit, and now we're focused on a more tribal and state-led reintroduction effort. And that is because last year, the Siletz tribe was awarded $1.56 million to help reintroduce sea otters to Northern California and Oregon through an America the Beautiful Challenge grant. And this is really huge because this includes not only the Siletz tribe, but it also includes two tribes in California, the Yurok tribe, the Tolowa Dene Nation, the Elakha Alliance, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians themselves, obviously, and the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. And so this is a 3-year grant, and we just met about a month ago all together in Coos Bay to kick off this grant. It's now called America's Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, AERI for short. And so hopefully at the end of 3 years, we will have a reintroduction proposal for sea otters in Northern California and Oregon as a regional approach to hand off to state and federal representatives to hopefully make it a reality. Another hopeful thing is that the Wildlife Conservation Network, which is an amazing group that connects very wealthy donors to wildlife advocates and groups across the globe. And so last year they launched the Sea Otter Fund, and so they're working to raise $42 million in 12 years to help sea otter restoration along their native range in the Pacific coast. And so they got that number because that is the estimate that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published in their feasibility assessment for sea otter reintroduction in Northern California and Oregon. And so they've already raised $2 million in 1 year. So that is very hopeful for a lot of the nonprofits and groups working for sea otter conservation across the United States right now. So how can you help the Elakha Alliance? If you don't already, you can sign up for a monthly newsletter, The Raft. It comes from me, Chanel, in your mailbox once a month. Obviously, we're a nonprofit, so donations are super helpful. And if you have little ones at home, I have a fun free coloring page on there as well. We also are part of the Bottle Drop Blue Bag program. So if you recycle your bottles and cans, you can shoot me an email and I can send you a box of blue bags. And that is also very helpful for us to fundraise too. And right now, very exciting. This is our 2nd year of kind of an individual fundraising campaign called We Oughta Bring Them Back. And so people sign up as otter advocates and they get their own fundraising page. And so you are asked to ask your friends and family to help you raise money for the Elakha Alliance. We're asking people to raise $250 and so to collectively raise $12,000 from June 8th to July 6th. Is really the kickoff for this. And if you register to be an otter advocate, you get a really cool t-shirt. And we have long sleeve and youth sizes as well. Right now, we already have 24 otter advocates registered and they've already raised 22% of our goal. So it's really fun and engaging. And we're going to have a webinar on Friday, a lunch and learn. If you're curious to learn more about how to participate, I can put that in the link in the chat. Hopefully, maybe you can get, or it's on our website. We're also across every social media platform you can think of. So please give us a like and a follow. And if you want to learn a lot more about the Elakha Alliance, we have a lot of wonderful resources on our website. You can get there simply by putting in OregonSeaOtters.org. We'll take you to the same place. And then a selfless plug, myself and local Portland artist Mike Bennett have created an animal education podcast. So if you have curious kids in your household that have any question about animals, each episode starts with a kid asking a question like, why do sloths poop on the ground and not in the sky? And then we answer it as a scientist and an artist and have some really great artists and scientists guests too. So super fun. If you like short little podcasts that are helpful and educational, I suggest you give it a follow. And for Elakha, we have a lot of really amazing partners. Everyone who is a sponsor on this webinar series is one of them. So just want to say thank you to everyone who has worked with us for the last 5+ years to hopefully make sea otter reintroduction a reality. And as I mentioned, sometimes we do have some spottings of live sea otters on the Oregon coast, though it's very rare. The 1% of the email I got was really true that there were otters on the Oregon coast, and this was in 2024. We had these two male sea otters from the Washington population come down, and they're looking for some ladies. And guess what? We don't have any. So you can see that guy is just really looking around for some ladies, maybe. He got to look around the rock. Is there some over there? Nope. He's not going to find them. So unfortunately, these two bachelors didn't last very long on the Oregon coast, and most likely ended up swimming back up to Washington because there were illegal fireworks on 4th of July at this beach shortly after this video was taken, and then they weren't seen again. But if you think you do see an otter, make sure to take a photo or video and email it to me. And that's all I got for you today. Thank you for dealing with my scratchy throat the whole time. I know it's pretty annoying, so hopefully you made it through.
Thank you so much, Chanel. Lots of information there and lots of ways to engage. We've got a couple questions in the QA, and there's also a few in the chat. So I'll work my way through both of those, and we'll see what the audience has to ask.
Oh,
Let's see. Start out. Are there any invasive species of urchins in Oregon?
nope.
Probably give a whole.
There are not any invasive species of urchins in Oregon, and I want to make sure that, urchins kind of are getting a bad spotlight just because they're overpopulating, but they are a natural animal and vertebrate in the marine ecosystem. It's just that the marine ecosystem is out of balance when predator and prey dynamics are off, and so they're just overpopulating, so they're kind of looking like the bad guy, but they are natural to the ecosystem.
Yeah. Another person asked, what's the relationship between river otters and sea otters? Do they compete for the same resources?
No, they don't. They pretty much leave each other alone. Places where there are river otters and sea otters don't really intermingle with each other. River otters forage oftentimes in the rivers. River otters eat fish. Sea otters do not eat fish. That's also a common misconception. And so they forage and eat different things. So they're good.
Great. And William asked, are marsh crabs the same as red rock crabs? If not, are marsh crabs in Oregon?
That is a good question. I'd have to get back to you. I feel like they're different, but I'm not 100% sure. So,
I Googled it during the
did you?
presentation. They
Do you
are
know the
different.
answer? Okay, good. My instinct is correct.
Okay. Are there studies to show that sea otters, are there studies that have measured sea otter predation on Dungeness crabs? We know they like them.
Not that I know of. I know we work closely with the fishing community. We meet with the Dungeness Crab Commission, and do presentations and meetings with them, where we've done GIS studies where the commercial crabbing for Dungeness is so far off of the Oregon coast, it would never intermingle with a potential site of sea otter reintroduction. And also the good thing about Dungeness crabs is they can get out of the diving range of sea otters, so they can be on the move and not be there. So yeah, it's not really likely that they would eat every single Dungeness crab. That is kind of a very not valid statement to assume because sea otters eat over 100 different species, and also crabs can be on the move and get out of the way.
Okay, here's the chicken and egg conundrum. I've been wondering about this. Do you need a healthy kelp forest to reintroduce sea otters, or do the sea otters survive and improve the kelp forest?
Yeah, so we do have enough healthy kelp forests for sea otters to be reintroduced. That's what our feasibility study concluded. It's just not as much kelp forest as there historically was. So, um, and sea otter's growth rate is really slow population wise. So historically, maybe we had 3,000 to 4,000 sea otters on the Oregon coast, and that would never happen again just because we don't have that much habitat for them anymore. So most likely we might have a couple hundred over the next like several decades if we were to reintroduce them. And so, yeah. And we also have estuaries, which are another great reintroduction sites as well. But they do help the kelp forest ecosystem over time get in balance again. But like for example, the sea otters in Washington are the most closely related ecosystem to the Oregon coast. And some of them don't even live in kelp forests. They just live over sandy bottoms and eat a lot of clams that live in there. So they don't necessarily need a lot of kelp, but they do help the environment.
Okay, Sasha asked, are there any volunteer opportunities for with the Elakha Alliance in Eugene?
Yeah. So Katie, my coworker, lives in Eugene and she's by herself down there, so she could always use help for from volunteers for tabling at different events and functions. So I would suggest sending her an email, katie@elakhaalliance.org. She would love to meet you.
Okay, and Ruth wanted to know, can you just buy the t-shirt directly or do you have to be a fundraiser?
So the t-shirt helps us fundraise. So if you sign up to be an otter advocate, then we will send you that t-shirt and then you'll be part of the campaign. But you don't necessarily need to then send it to all your friends and family.
Okay, and Karen asked, my understanding is otters were attempted to be reintroduced in both the northern and southern Oregon over past years. Is one region more adaptable to sea otters, north or
Um,
south?
yeah, that's not true. It was only the southern Oregon coast that they were released. And so based on our feasibility study, most of the reintroduction sites are considered on the southern Oregon coast because that's where our rocky reefs are, hence kelp forests, but also estuaries like Yaquina Bay, and Coos Bay, and now potentially Tillamook Bay, may be also good places for reintroduction efforts too. The northern Oregon coast just doesn't have as many kelp forests as the southern, so less places for them to thrive.
And Elliot asked, what are the specific criteria for a location to possibly reintroduce? And are there any criteria that were surprises in the identified in the feasibility study?
Yeah, I would suggest you jump on our website and check out the feasibility study because each chapter is basically different criteria that you look for, like habitat suitability. Is there prey suitability there? Disease, is there a heightened area that could have more diseases for sea otters than other ones? There's nothing really that was identified that was surprising in the feasibility study. It was just finding out, is it even feasible to bring them back? Because obviously, if it wasn't for the ecosystem, then we wouldn't be here today pushing this effort.
Okay, and Patty asked, have you identified potential sites that could result in a successful reintroduction? I think we touched on that.
Yeah, we talked about that. Ultimately, we can just give our best guesses to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who control where sea otters go under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and their federally protected species. So they will be the ones to pick the site locations, but we can do everything in our power to give them as best educated information and data as to where they might thrive. But they are a wild animal, so no matter if we pick the best place we think based on all the science that they would thrive, they might just swim a little bit north and go to a different place or a little bit south. And so that sea otter statistical model that Dr. Tim Tinker is releasing this year indicates if you were to release sea otters in a certain site over time, it showcases if they move north and south on the map as well, which is really neat to see too.
You
Yeah, and I
mentioned
also
estuaries, or go ahead.
Yeah, I also want to say that sea otters are not a migratory species. So a lot of times people are like, well, why don't they just like all swim down from Washington or swim up from California? Uh, they just don't naturally do that. And so we do have lone males coming down because they're not taking care of a pup and they're just trying to spread their seed, so to speak. And so they have the freedom to roam. And you'll never really see a full raft of females and their pups, moving down the coast, up or down. The kelp is not always greener on the other side.
You did mention estuaries could be key. What is special about estuaries for reintroduction success?
Yeah. Well, we see Dr. Brent Hughes and all of the estuary research that sea otters are a keystone species in maintaining the health and biodiversity of eelgrass beds in these estuary ecosystems. And so right now I know the South Slough in Coos Bay is having an impact on losing a lot of their eelgrass and also having those invasive European green crabs. So that could be a great place for sea otters to be reintroduced there to help kind of combat these ecological changes right now.
Yeah, let's see. Another question. I think you may have answered this already. Are southern sea otters expanding their range north, and are northern sea otters expanding their range south? If not, why?
Yeah, great question. So all the California sea otters, southern sea otters, they have plateaued in their population growth because they can't naturally expand north or south because of juvenile white shark predation. So especially to the north, they basically hit a wall of white sharks and can't expand anymore, which is why there's a joint effort to reintroduce them in Northern California along with Oregon. And the northern subspecies, they're doing just fine in Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska, so they're not really looking to move around.
Okay, and you touched on the blob heat wave of 2012-13 as being
Mhm.
detrimental to kelp and conducive to urchins, but otters have been gone for a long time. So, why do we suddenly in 2012 see a superabundance of urchins and the loss of kelp?
Yeah, that's because what was holding it down in the kelp forest, the sunflower sea stars, were impacted by that blob. So 99% of the global population of sea stars got infected with the sea star wasting disease, and they have not bounced back as quickly as some of their other sea star counterparts. So now you have an ecosystem missing two key predators of these purple sea urchins, and that is why the overpopulation of urchins started really increasing and why we saw a big loss of kelp as well.
Okay, I think several people in the audience want that T-shirt. Another question: what's the name again of the Otter Club that gets the T-shirt and raise 250? How do I get signed up for it?
Yeah, let me, can I stop sharing my screen and I can put in the chat here. Let me see if I can, or maybe let me do this. I'll put in the registration for the We Ought to Bring Them Back in, I don't know, can I send a message to
I
everyone?
think you can drop it in the chat. I'm not
I
sure if
don't
everybody
think
can. No, I'm not
I,
sure. Let me
I
see if
can't
the.
do that.
Okay.
Um, if you go to givebutter.com, and just type in we otter bring them back / register. Here, maybe I can share that on my screen. Aha, can you see
There we
that?
go. We sure can.
Okay, cool. Let me get this. Okay, so if you type in givebutter.com / we otter bring them back / register, it'll come up with this campaign page, and I'm already logged in, so that's why my name's already here. But it'll have you fill out your information, and then you can register for the campaign, and we'll send you the t-shirt.
And if you wear the T-shirt, people are going to ask, "Where'd you get that T-shirt?"
Yeah,
And how do I get one?
yeah. Here's what the page looks like, so you can check it out. So, as I mentioned, we're at 22% of the goal. Here's some amazing otter advocates. Some people are already at 375. But it's really easy, and it's launching on World Oceans Day on June 8th. And if you want to join our Lunch and Learn webinar, you can register for it on this page too. Just about 30 minutes on Friday.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Let's see, here's yeah, that's all the questions we have. So if people have any other questions, please put them in the chat. We'll give you a minute or two to see what comes up.
Yeah, thanks for all the wonderful questions.
And if anybody's going to be in the Newport area, Sunday is World Ocean Day. Chanel will be there with the Elakha Alliance. I'll be there with Seven Capes. Should be a fun day at the aquarium.
Yeah, head to the Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport. There'll be a lot of wonderful organizations there.
Well, I'm not seeing new questions pop into the Q&A, but wonderful presentation, Chanel. Learned so much, so eager to find out more. And lots of thank yous popping up. I'm sure if we could hear the audience, though, that's the one thing with webinars is you can't applaud, but I know people are waving their hands. So thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good night.
And good night to all the audience. Thank you for participating.
Bye.